Welcome to The Application, a podcast focused on actionable takeaways to help you level up your marketing and enrollment management game. I'm your host, Dr. Allison Tercio, Assistant Vice President of Enrollment and Marketing at Siena College. Join me every Tuesday for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing and enrollment management. The Application is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher ed professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal faves linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Setting the right goals, ones that are actually achievable, backed by data, and aligned with institutional priorities, can feel like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. But today we're tackling exactly that, and we're going to totally geek out over data. We're going to talk about how to define actionable goals using historical data and strategic foresight. With me is Carrie Chambers, a data-driven marketing strategist with over 15 years of experience in higher education, and she's here to help us unpack this. Carrie has seen firsthand how data can reveal surprising trends, guide goal setting, and sometimes even challenge long-held assumptions about student behavior. She's here to share her tips on using data effectively, avoiding common pitfalls, and empowering your team to set and achieve SMART goals. But before we get into the data, Carrie, I've got a fun question for you. You've spent years analyzing trends and behaviors, and you're a really big fan of reality TV, like me. I'm also a huge fan. So if you could create a marketing campaign for your favorite reality TV show, what would the show be and what would it look like?
So I love this question because I love all the Bravo shows. And
Me
I feel
too!
like I feel like we don't tell anybody, but then when you do,
I
you
always
find so many
use it
people.
when you do the icebreaker, like what's your guilty pleasure? That's when I confess my love of Bravo.
And so I love all the Real Housewives. So I couldn't choose one of those. So I chose Traders. So first, since we're talking goals and data, before I developed a campaign, I'd want to know what is the goal for the campaign. So I'm going to say the goal for mine would be audience engagement. So Traders is a show that takes people from various reality TV shows, puts them all together. There are traders and there are faithfuls, but you don't know who is who. And the traders kill off the faithfuls. And so then either the traders win or the faithfuls win, depends on who makes it to the end of the show. So what I would do is for an engagement campaign is like an online partner game to traders. So you sign up and you get put in with a group and you play every week along with the show. And so every week somebody is killed off from your group and you have to figure out who the faithful and who the traders are. And there'd be some kind of maybe a cash prize at the end or some kind of prizes so that you would get a feel for what it's like to be on the show. And then it would give lots of opportunities for additional ad revenue and things like that with people being in the game. So when I thought of that, I thought I would love to play that game. So maybe they'll listen to this.
Maybe you should start it, Carrie, and make some money.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like fantasy sports, but for traders.
Yeah. For reality TV. Yeah.
All right, let's start talking goals applied to enrollment marketing and higher ed marketing. But let's start with the basics. Enrollment teams and marketing teams sit on a gold mine of data, but it's often underutilized or can also feel overwhelming. So in your experience, what's one thing you've learned from historical data that really shifted your strategy or challenged your assumptions?
Yeah, so for a lot of my career, I worked with online programs and online program marketing and recruitment. And when I was working with undergrad programs, our assumption was that our students were going to match the national trend, which was mostly female, around 27 years old, average age, and like have other things in life going on, kids, jobs, things like that. And so a lot of our marketing looked like that. And I decided to look and see, because I thought maybe that's not actually who we're getting. So I took 5 years of historical data for our online majors. So I was able to parse it out by those online majors only so that I could answer who actually inquires, who actually applies, who actually matriculates, and who actually persists. What I found was that the majority of our inquiries and applicants did meet our assumptions. The majority of them were female. They were around 27 years old. However, 18 to 22-year-old males were much more likely to matriculate and even more likely to persist. So those actually enrolling in the majors were more likely to be younger and male. I also found that less than 50% of our online major matriculants completed their FAFSA, and that 50% that did complete their FAFSA were significantly more likely to persist. It was something like 90 some percent persistence for those that did complete it. So we had to recognize our responsibility in recognizing multiple audiences that we're recruiting from, because that the average 27-year age female is an audience that we are still recruiting, but not ignore that more traditional age male student and have messaging for them as well. And to accept that it's on all of us to communicate and educate students on the importance of completing that FAFSA, because ultimately we all have the responsibility not only to get students in the door, but to make sure they make it all the way through.
Well, I feel like you had so many questions get answered
Yeah.
in that one data initiative. Was that a surprise that there were all of these findings that you could apply so quickly, really, because it was, this information became so obvious, and what you would have to do in reaction to it feels obvious, right?
Yeah. I was not so surprised that those in our majors did not match the national trend. I looked at it because I was thinking that that's what I was noticing. But that FAFSA piece, that really stuck out to me and provided something so actionable that could make such a big difference. We talk all the time about how it costs so much less in terms of like actual money and labor to retain the students and to pull in new students. And so it offered an opportunity to do that.
Well, yeah, you've already put the resource into recruiting them. We want them to stay. And the other thing that strikes me about your example is I think one of the most, I'll call it an unsung hero kind of trait for marketers is curiosity. Because you've got to be looking at what's happening and what you're seeing and be curious enough to go on that journey to find out what's happening in that data. And a lot of times that first step has to do with accessing the data. Like you have to be able to have the data that you can kind of recognize, oh, there's something here. I want to go find out, but you have to have access. So what are some practical ways that we can work maybe sometimes with other offices who are holding this data to get what we need to make informed decisions and get these sort of insights?
So I think maybe the most important thing is to know what questions you want to answer before you go ask for data versus like getting all the data you can and seeing what you find in it. If you know what questions you're trying to answer, then those people that are pulling the data, they know what they need to pull for you. They can identify those data points and those variables. Also having a conversation with your partners about what data is available. Some institutions use multiple systems for student data. And so it's important to know how these systems interact and what the data in them represent. So some use a different system for recruitment and then one for those that are enrolled students. Often in that recruitment data, you can't look back. So what's in there today is the student's current record. So maybe they applied 2 years ago, but they've been moved to the current recruitment cycle. So looking back 2 years ago, you're missing that student and you're missing that context as well. And so understanding what systems there are and what data is in them. And then don't ask for identifying data. In marketing,
we don't need it. Yeah.
I can't think of really anything that we would need it for. We're looking at cumulative data. And so if we like upfront are telling them, I don't need identifying data, they're going to be so much more willing to give it to you because they're not going to feel like they need to protect it so much.
I think it's smart what you were saying about, have your request really solid when you go and make the request, because on our end, we don't like it when someone comes to us and say they want help promoting an event. There's someone on campus who wants to promote, and they say, oh, we need help with a flyer. And then you do that. And then they say, oh, we need help with social media too. Oh, we don't like that sort of trickle. We want to have a strategic conversation up front about what are we trying to accomplish and what is needed, right? So we want to do that as well with our partners on campus who have this data that can be so useful to us. And we've all been there. We have these data, we pull these reports, and we look at averages a lot of times. But I know you have some thoughts on that. So why are averages potentially dangerous, and in particular for enrollment marketing? And what's a better way that we can use when we're analyzing trends in student behavior?
So I will say the more data you have, the less dangerous averages are.
Yep.
And that's because of outliers. So I have an example. I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and my husband and I are in our 40s. So the average age in our household is 24. However, any kind of messaging geared toward 24-year-olds that would be sent to our house is going to fall flat. So it doesn't make sense to use averages for that kind of thing. I am a big fan of date-based data. So doing things like tracking trends by date and then overlaying initiatives on top of those. So graphing the pace of like 3 years of application data is usually what I like 2 previous years and then the current cycle. So it's literally 3 lines, usually like August to July is what we're looking at, the 12 months of data. Let's say we did a text campaign about completing your application. You can plot that on that data and see for this current cycle when we did that, do we see a change? And is that change different than previous years? If it is, then we can indirectly attribute that change to our initiative. And a lot of times the attribution can be challenging. And so we can't say it's definitely because of the test, but we can say this is the thing we did differently than the previous 2 years. We can more confidently attribute it to that.
I think it goes back to what you were saying when we're trying to access the data as well. When we have clarity in what we're trying to accomplish, then it becomes clear what the metrics are. And for instance, that averages wouldn't work out. Your example about your family is perfect. That because a marketer, I don't know, might want to be doing direct mail to your household. But obviously the direct mail that we're gearing toward the mid-20s is just going to go right in the recycle bin. A higher ed example would be average income of your prospective student families. If we're going to speak to everybody like they're at the average income, there's a lot of people that's not going to necessarily resonate with, right? So what is it we're trying to do with the knowledge on an action standpoint, right? Like what if we as marketers have this information, what are we going to do with it? Which might help us look for those dangerous points where doing an average, for instance, won't make sense for what we're trying to accomplish.
And that's being a good steward of the data, using it responsibly.
And another one that's tricky is the percentages, right? So let's talk about that. What would you caution enrollment marketers about when presenting percentages in reports or strategies or relying on them too heavily?
So percentages, it's similar to averages. So if you've got outliers, it can really throw it off. And again, the more data you have, the less problematic it's going to be. So I would just encourage using raw numbers with your percentages for transparency. I would say when you're presenting to higher level people, they really care more about the percentage than they're going to about the raw number, but that raw number is going to give it context to anybody that might have a question about it.
I think what you were saying in the averages example too, sometimes it's where the change in the percentages, that's what matters. So if for instance, let's say I'm looking at a report for regions of admitted students, and I'm looking at what the proportion or the percentages for each of those regions in making up the total admits this year versus last year, right? That to look at proportion that way, then percentage makes sense. But again, it all goes back to what is it we're trying to understand. So I think our field is kind of unique if you're thinking about enrollment marketing, because it kind of mixes in ways that other marketing fields don't, because we're talking about student data, behavioral data, and external market insights as well, and kind of putting all of that together. So could you walk us through some key types of data that are most valuable, you think, for enrollment marketing and how we should use them?
I would say three kind of categories that I typically look at. The first one is funnel conversion data. I think we all look at funnel conversion data, but we should have our enrollment goals, but we have to make sure that we can actually achieve them. So our funnel conversion data can tell us what we need to do to meet those goals. Starting from the bottom of that funnel, we've got to work backwards to the top to determine how much spend it would take to get whatever that top of funnel needs to be. And then if our spend's not enough, that does not mean we can't achieve the goal or that we need to spend more. Instead, it means that we're going to have to be more creative in how we increase that top of funnel, and then recognize that those more creative ways are likely going to convert in a different way than our traditional top of funnel. I like student characteristic data. So looking at who's entering the funnel and who's matriculating, looking at, does that vary by program, looking at the location to determine markets and how much we should spend in each versus just throwing money across the US, and then using all of that to identify who and where to target and updating it regularly. And then I like pacing data a lot. So I would say this one's maybe a little more challenging. Getting those dates that are tied to the different student actions can be challenging, but once you get that set up, I think it tells a lot so that you can develop a timeline of key student actions year over year. And it really needs to be updated weekly because it's an early indicator of if you need to pivot anything that you're doing.
Those are really great examples. And then the first one, I think, also illustrates how important it is to be in sync with the admissions or the recruiting team. Because if you're starting with that goal and you're working your way backwards and you're looking at, okay, what impact do we think on the marketing side we can have with the resources that we have and the creative solutions that we're going to implement? Because maybe the goal can't completely be made up, whatever gap there is at the top of the funnel, when that's a discussion of what are we going to do further in the funnel and how do we partner with the recruiting side of things to maybe get those conversions up a bit higher so that we can get to the end goal. So I like how that kind of effort gets not just to our job, but how do we need to collaborate, right? And work across those silos. All right, let's talk about goals.
Okay.
So we're enrollment marketers and enrollment teams. We're often balancing really ambitious institutional priorities with the reality of budgets and resources. And you already gave one really great example about how we have to sometimes just find solutions and think creatively through that. But how can we define SMART goals that feel both achievable and inspiring? And maybe we should run through the acronym SMART for everybody as well.
So S is specific, so identifying exactly what you're trying to do. M is measurable, so how are you going to track it and make sure it's successful? A is achievable. What are you going to do to get to that goal? Relevant means that it aligns with the department or the university's mission. And then time bound. When are you going to do it? I think it's important that there are institutional goals that lead to our department or division goals, that lead to our team goals, and then lead to individual goals. Then I think it's important that everybody is able to see how their daily work contributes up into those goals. I also think establishing these goals as a leader allows you to kind of put guardrails up where you can, when people are asking things of your team, you can really identify what does and does not contribute to those goals. And those things that don't contribute, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get done, but they may not be a priority.
I like that because we're always looking for working smarter, not more.
Yes.
Because that sometimes is what it feels like, right? Like, and we already have this baseline of things that we're always working on. But then there's this new idea. Like, for instance, let's go back to the funnel example. We've got to get more at the top of the funnel given the same reason. Well, that's going on someone's plate, right?
Yeah.
But is anything coming off the plate? So I really like your idea of how can we structure SMART goals that help us make those kinds of decisions too. Decisions about our to-do list.
Right, exactly. And defining the SMART goals in general makes them feel achievable. Not everybody's great at defining SMART goals though. So I love SMART goals in data. It's how my brain works, but I've also managed a lot of creatives. And I find that it's just not a strength of theirs, which is great because their strengths lie in other areas. And it's not why they're on the team. They're on the team to create amazing, beautiful things. And so what's worked for me in the past, managing creative, is to bring everyone together as a team and brainstorm, not goals, but what do you want to do? What do you want to improve or do new in this coming year? I like using Post-its, either digitally or physically together. And then we can categorize them. And then from there, we can talk about what does a goal look like for these things and how does it feed up into those goals, higher level and higher level. And then in my experience, people can understand more. It's more tangible to them of, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And this is how it contributes. And we've developed it together. So while the overarching strategy and goals are top down, the way we're going to do it is bottom up with those people that are actually going to be doing the work.
And that's how you get also to the inspiring piece. Actually, and now I think about the achievable piece, because if you feel connected to the goal, it feels personal to you, then of course it's going to be something that you're bought into. Therefore,
Right.
It'll be more achievable.
And we've all decided together, this is what we want to do as a team next year. And so it happens to go toward the goals that the president or the bot set, but it's our plan.
Yeah. I want to get into some other examples if you have them, but quick pause just to say if you're listening and you're enjoying these insights, take a quick pause and recommend or review the podcast. That's the best way to get more people listening to it, and share with a friend or colleague if you think they'd be interested. It means so much to me when people rate and review the podcast. So back to Carrie, though. Can you share, do you have any other real world examples of how to put SMART goals into action for an enrollment campaign? What does success look like when we're using SMART goals?
When I was working with online grad programs, we identified term enrollment goals. So for fall, spring, summer, by year, and used SMART goals to develop the plan to achieve those goals. So it sounded something like specific increase enrollment in the online graduate program to 75 students, and then identifying 35 fall, 25 spring, 15 summer by the end of fiscal year 2026. Measurable. To measure it, we would track weekly pacing numbers for inquiries, application starts, application submits, and deposits against those year-over-year numbers to ensure that we are growing toward that goal. How do we know it's achievable? Well, we can identify targeted marketing campaigns, virtual info sessions, key platforms that we want to get on to attract those prospective students. Is it relevant to the goals of the institution? So does this goal aligns with the university's mission to expand access to graduate education? And then it's time bound. It's got to be done by June 30th, 2026 to live within fiscal year 2026.
No, I was about to say, I feel like relevant is the easy one for enrollment marketers. But then I thought maybe not, because of course, enrollment is always going to be an institutional priority, right? So that's a goal. But then I thought, but maybe not in certain programs. And maybe, we could be choosing the wrong programs that we're emphasizing in our SMART goals. So we actually do need to think about it more than I thought at first glance.
And it could be applicants from a certain area or the quality of applicants, things like that. But that's to the point. It has to be specific. What exactly do we want to get?
Yeah, and then the KPIs change too. Those sort of tracking KPIs that you were naming, they would be specific to the program or specific to a geographic location, students coming from a geographic location. Your earlier example of men versus women coming into the program, like you wouldn't be just looking, because that was important to be looking at. It wouldn't just be the total numbers that are coming through that funnel. you'd be looking at the gender breakdown for reasons, for specific reasons. So it's really layered, and maybe we don't always catch the layers in this planning.
And when you're doing this kind of work, we can definitely get a lot of this data from our partners inside the institution. If you're working with an external marketing partner, they should be able to give you a good amount of this data. So you should be able to tell them, these are the questions that I'm trying to answer. And they should be able to give you a lot of, especially that top of funnel, or how much it would cost to get the number of inquiries you need in top of funnel, things like that. They should be able to give that to you.
I think you covered this, but just because we're getting to the end of the podcast, I find that having clarity up front about what you're trying to accomplish and what you need to track helps with all of that. Because if you establish what those KPIs are going to be, then you're going to set your campaigns up in a way that tracks them. So it's very hard to do, not impossible, but it's harder to do if you're mid through a campaign and then you say to yourself, oh, I wonder this. I wonder how this is tracking. But if you have it set up front, because you already know what you're looking for, then it all becomes much easier.
Definitely. That doesn't mean, so don't freak out if you're listening to this and you're like, but I don't have it all set up. And you can still think of it as iterations or phases. So what can we do to impact this cycle, and what can we do better to better impact the next one?
Absolutely. I think after every campaign I've ever run, I've realized other data points I wish I captured during the campaign. And some things you can recapture because Google Analytics and other things that you're using can help you go back in time, but it's always better up front. So yes, it's better to make progress, not perfection, is what we're talking about here.
Right.
Carrie, thank you so much for coming and geeking out with me about data and goals. It's one of my favorite topics too.
Oh, for sure. Me too.
And thanks for giving everyone some actionable steps around it, because it is something that can feel overwhelming because there is a lot of data, and I think everyone agrees and knows we want to leverage it, but the how can get tricky. For our listeners who want to learn more about your work or connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me at LinkedIn, Carrie Chambers, or they can find me at Miami University as the Associate Director for Marketing Communication for the regional campuses.
Thanks again, Carrie, for joining us. And to our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the application for more actionable strategies for enrollment marketing. See you next time. The application is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed tech shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea, and they feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Day Kibbles, Jeremy Tiers, and so many other of your favorite higher ed leaders. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.